The king had not smiled in 214 years, and Rose Ramsey was about to change that by doing the one thing that could get her executed. She stood at the base of the grand staircase, heart hammering against her ribs, watching the coronation ceremony unfold in the cavernous throne room of the Rosencourt, the hidden palace beneath London, where vampire nobility had governed for millennia. Marble columns soared toward vaulted ceilings painted with constellations that predated human astronomy. Chandeliers dripped with crystals that caught the light of 1,000 candles, casting fractured rainbows across the assembled court. Every vampire present wore white or silver, their pale skin luminous, their hair ranging from platinum to snow. They moved with that peculiar stillness unique to the undead, beautiful and terrible as winter itself. Rose did not belong here. She was human, 23 years old, with dark auburn hair pulled into a simple braid and a cotton dress she had sewn herself forest green, because it was the only fabric she could afford that did not show the constant dust from her workshop. She was a seamstress, nothing more, and she had only entered this hall because she had been mending the ceremonial banner that now hung behind the throne, its silver embroidery catching the light. When the guards had opened the doors for the procession, she had been in the gallery, and before she could retreat, the crowd had swept her along. Now she stood among beings who could kill her with thought, watching the vampire she had fallen impossibly, irrevocably in love with, accept a crown that would place him even further beyond her reach. King Caspian Ravenswood stood at the top of the grand staircase, framed by the massive banner Rose had spent 6 weeks repairing. He was tall, his posture so impeccable it seemed almost military, his white hair falling to his shoulders in a straight, heavy curtain that caught the candlelight like snow under moonlight. His face was carved, perfection, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of winter storms. He wore robes of white velvet trimmed with silver, and when he moved, it was with a grace that made human motion seem clumsy by comparison. Rose had met him 3 months ago when the palace steward had hired her to restore the ancient banner. She had expected never to see the king himself, but Caspian had appeared in her workshop on the second day, silent as death, and had watched her work for an hour before speaking. "You use a fishing knot for the silver thread," he had said, his voice low and precise, with an accent that carried centuries of linguistic evolution. Rose had nearly stabbed herself with her needle. "Yes, your majesty, it holds better under tension. The original embroiderer used it too. You can see the pattern if you look closely at the older sections." He had stepped closer, examining her work with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You have studied the old techniques. I study everything I can find. There are books in the public library, archives online. This kind of work, it is not just about making something beautiful. It is about understanding why the original artist made each choice, what they were trying to say." Caspian had looked at her, then really looked, and for a moment something had flickered in those storm gray eyes. "You believe objects carry intention." "I believe people pour themselves into what they create. This banner was made by someone who loved your family. You can see it in every stitch. I wanted to honor that." He had visited her workshop every day after that. Sometimes he spoke, asking about her techniques or sharing histories of the court so old they made her head spin. Sometimes he simply watched, and Rose had grown comfortable with his silence, had even begun to anticipate his arrivals, her pulse quickening when she heard his footsteps in the hall. She had not meant to fall in love. She knew it was foolish, dangerous even. But somewhere between his rare, careful smiles and the way he listened when she spoke truly. Listened, as though her words mattered, her heart had betrayed her completely. Now, watching him accept the obsidian crown from the High Chancellor, Rose felt that love like a physical ache. The ceremony required absolute silence from the court. It was tradition, the steward had explained when she had asked why no one applauded or spoke. The coronation was a sacred moment, a transfer of power that demanded reverence and stillness. To break that silence was to show disrespect to the crown itself. The High Chancellor, an ancient vampire named Lucian who looked no older than 40 but whose eyes held millennia, placed the crown on Caspian's head with ritualistic precision. "By blood and bone, by night and shadow, I name you King of the Rosencourt, Sovereign of the Shadow Realm, Protector of the Old Covenants. May your reign be long and your justice swift." Caspian inclined his head, accepting the weight of the crown without flinching. His face was expressionless, beautiful, and remote as a statue. Rose had seen him smile exactly 3 times in 3 months' small, private expressions that had made her breath catch. But here, before his court, he wore the mask of kingship. Cold, untouchable, perfect. The court remained silent. Hundreds of vampires, nobles and soldiers and courtiers, all frozen in that eerie stillness. Rose could hear her own breathing, too loud, too mortal in this hall of the undead. She should stay quiet. She should wait for the ceremony to end, slip away, return to her small flat in Brixton, and try to forget the impossible thing that had grown in her chest. But she had spent 3 months falling in love with a man who had shown her in a dozen small ways that he saw her not as a human, not as a servant, but as someone worth knowing. And she had seen beneath his careful control, had glimpsed the loneliness that lived in him like a second shadow. The court had not seen their king smile in 214 years. Rose knew why. Lucian had told her during one of their fittings, when she had asked about the king's history. He lost someone, Lucian had said, his ancient eyes sad. His queen, Thea. She was killed by vampire hunters 2 centuries ago, burned in daylight while Caspian was trapped behind enemy lines during the border wars. When he returned, there was nothing left but ash. He has not permitted himself joy since. Some say he cannot feel it anymore. I believe he simply will not allow himself to. Rose had thought about that every day since. The weight of 200 years of grief, the discipline required to hold back every spontaneous emotion, every unguarded moment. She had seen the cost of it in the tightness around Caspian's eyes, in the way he held himself apart even from his own people. She thought about it now, watching him stand alone at the top of the grand staircase, crowned and isolated, and she made a decision that terrified her. She stepped forward. The movement drew eyes immediately. Vampires noticed everything, and a human moving during the sacred silence was as jarring as a shout in a library. Rose felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, predatory and cold, but she did not stop. She walked to the base of the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor, and began to climb. The silence changed. It was no longer reverential, it was shocked, dangerous. Rose heard the whisper of movement behind her, vampires shifting position, hands moving toward weapons. But she kept climbing, her eyes on Caspian. He had gone very still, his gaze locked on her, and she could not read his expression. Fear lanced through her, sharper than any blade. What if she had misjudged? What if the quiet care he had shown her had been mere politeness, nothing more? She was halfway up the staircase when Lucian's voice cut through the silence, sharp with alarm. "Stop her! She breaks the coronation rite!" 2 guards materialized at Rose's sides, their hands closing on her arms with inhuman strength. They were not rough, but their grip was unbreakable, and they halted her ascent immediately. Rose's heart lurched, panic flooding through her, but she forced herself to look up to meet Caspian's eyes. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I know I should not be here. I know this breaks every rule, but I cannot stand silent and watch you lock yourself away again. Not when I know..." Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard. "Not when I know you deserve to be happy." The throne room was so quiet Rose could hear the candle flames guttering. Every vampire stared at her with expressions ranging from outrage to fascination. The guards' grips tightened, preparing to drag her away. Then Caspian moved. He descended the staircase with that preternatural speed vampires possessed, and suddenly he was there, standing 1 step above her, close enough that Rose could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. He looked at the guards, and though he did not speak, they released her immediately, stepping back with deference. Caspian studied her face, his own expression still unreadable. "You should not have come here, Rose." "I know." "You broke sacred protocol. The court will demand consequences." "I know that too." Rose's hands were shaking, but she did not look away. "I do not care. I could not let you stand there, alone, without anyone to witness who you really are. Not just a king. A person who has been grieving for 200 years and thinks he does not deserve to stop." Something flickered across Caspian's face, surprise, perhaps, or pain. "You know nothing of what I deserve. I know you visit my workshop even when the banner does not need you. I know you remember every detail I've ever told you about my work, my life. I know you stand by the window when you think I'm not looking, and you watch the sunrise through the gap in the shutters, even though it must hurt your eyes." Rose took a shaky breath. "I know you care. Caspian, I see you, and I am tired of pretending I do not love you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true. Rose heard the gasps from the court, the shocked murmurs beginning to ripple through the assembled vampires. She had just confessed love to a king in front of his entire court, broken a sacred ceremony to do it, and she would likely pay with her life. She found she did not regret it. Caspian's eyes had gone very wide, the careful mask cracking. He opened his mouth, closed it, then seemed to struggle for words in a way Rose had never seen from him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "You cannot love me. Too late." "Rose, you do not understand. If I allow myself to, if I acknowledge—" He stopped, shaking his head. "The laws are clear. No human may touch the sovereign unbidden during a coronation ceremony. The punishment is death. If I show you favor now, the court will say I have been compromised, that I am unfit to rule, and if I do not punish you, I will be seen as weak. Either way, you will suffer for this." Rose's stomach dropped. She had not thought about the specific laws, only about the need to reach him. "I did not mean to put you in that position." "I know." Something raw and desperate flickered in Caspian's eyes. "But you have, and now I must choose between the crown and—" He stopped abruptly, as if the words were too dangerous to speak aloud. "Your Majesty." Lucian's voice cut through the tension, cold and formal. The High Chancellor had descended from the dais, his ancient face set in harsh lines. "The law is explicit. The human has committed a capital offense. She must be remanded to the Blood Court for judgment." "She did not touch me," Caspian said sharply. The guard stopped her. "She attempted to—" Lucian gestured, and more guards began to close in, forming a ring around the staircase. The law does not distinguish between success and attempt when the coronation rite is violated. King Caspian, you know this. Your father wrote the statute himself after an assassination attempt 3 centuries ago. Caspian's hands had clenched into fists at his sides. Rose could see the tension in his shoulders, the battle raging behind his eyes. He was a king, bound by laws and duty, and she had put him in an impossible position because she could not control her own heart. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not think—" "No." Caspian's voice was hard now, commanding. He turned to face the court, and when he spoke, his words rang through the throne room with absolute authority. "Chancellor Lucian is correct. The law is clear, and it must be honored. However, the law also grants me the right of sovereign intervention in matters that touch the crown directly. I invoke that right now." Lucian's eyes narrowed. "Your Majesty, with respect, such interventions are reserved for matters of state importance. This is a human who broke protocol, nothing more." "Nothing more?" Caspian's gaze swept across the assembled vampires, and Rose saw several of them flinch under the weight of it. "This woman restored our most sacred banner, the symbol of our lineage, with such care and skill that the master archivists wept when they saw her work. She studied techniques lost for 500 years, learned our history, honored our traditions. And when she speaks, she does so with more honesty than I have heard in this court in 2 centuries. If you believe she is nothing more than a rule breaker, then you have not been paying attention." The court had gone utterly silent again. Rose stared at Caspian, her heart pounding. He was defending her, publicly, in front of everyone who mattered. Lucian's expression had shifted from stern to wary. "Your Majesty, are you saying you wish to pardon her?" "I am saying," Caspian said, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less commanding, "that she is right. About all of it. I have been alone for 200 years because I believed I had to be, because I thought if I allowed myself to feel anything, I would dishonor Thea's memory. But grief is not loyalty, and isolation is not strength. This woman saw that when no one else did, or no one else dared to say it." He turned back to Rose, and the expression on his face stole her breath. It was open, vulnerable, every careful wall stripped away. "You asked why I visit your workshop. It is because when I am there, I remember what it is to be more than a king. You treat me as though I am simply a person, and you listen when I speak as though my words matter beyond their political weight. I have not felt seen in 2 centuries, Rose Ramsey, not until you." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "Caspian, I love you." The words were quiet but utterly certain. "I have tried not to. I have told myself it is impossible, that you deserve someone who can give you a mortal life, that I have no right to ask you to be part of this world, but you are right. I am tired of locking myself away. I am tired of pretending I do not care. The throne room erupted. Vampires spoke over each other, some in outrage, others in shock. Rose heard fragments of arguments. The king cannot bind himself to a human. This is madness. The old laws forbid it. But she could not look away from Caspian. He had just declared his love for her in front of his entire court. He had chosen her over every law, every tradition. Enough! Caspian's voice cracked like a whip, and the court fell silent instantly. I am your king, and I will be heard. Yes, I love this human woman. Yes, I intend to keep her at my side, with all the protections and honors that entails. And if any law prevents that, then the law must change. Lucian stepped forward, his ancient face troubled. Your Majesty, I understand your feelings, but you must see reason. The touch law exists for your protection. If any person can approach the sovereign without consequence, you will be vulnerable to attack at every public gathering. Your father enacted this law with good cause. My father, Caspian said coldly, enacted this law out of paranoia and fear, and it has created a court where the king is so isolated that not one person has seen him smile in 2 centuries. That is not protection, Chancellor. That is a prison. He took Rose's hand, his fingers cool and strong around hers, and the simple contact made her breath catch. I will not punish this woman for having the courage to challenge a law that should never have existed. Instead, I will do something I should have done the moment I took the crown. I will change it. Murmurs rippled through the court again, but this time they carried a different energy. Rose could see vampires exchanging glances, some nodding slowly. Caspian's words had resonated, struck something that had been buried beneath centuries of tradition. Lucian studied the king for a long moment, then inclined his head with grudging respect. If you wish to amend the law, Your Majesty, the process is extensive. It will require a formal petition, review by the Council of Elders, and ratification by the High Court. Such matters take months, sometimes years. Then we will begin immediately, Caspian said, and until the law is amended, Rose Ramsey will remain under my direct protection as a guest of the crown. No one will touch her, threaten her, or treat her with anything less than the respect due to someone I hold dear. Is that understood? The court responded in unison, voices overlapping. Yes, Your Majesty. Caspian turned back to Rose, and for the first time since she had known him, he smiled a real smile, warm and unguarded, and so beautiful it made her chest ache. I believe you were trying to reach me. Rose laughed shakily, relief and joy flooding through her in equal measure. I was. I'm sorry I caused such a scene. I'm not. Caspian stepped down to stand level with her, their hands still joined. You gave me something I had forgotten I could have. Hope. Then, with the entire court watching, Rose did what she had climbed the grand staircase to do. She leaned up and kissed him. It was not a dramatic kiss, not passionate or desperate. It was soft, tentative, the brush of her lips against his as gentle as a question. But Caspian's hand tightened on hers, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her heart stutter. When they broke apart, Rose saw that his eyes were bright, almost as though he were on the verge of tears, and he was still smiling, openly in front of everyone, that careful mask completely abandoned. The court stared in stunned silence for a heartbeat. Then someone began to applaud, a slow clap that Rose traced to a young vampire in the back, a woman with silver hair and an amused expression. Another vampire joined in, then another, and within moments the throne room filled with applause, the sound echoing off the marble columns. Lucian shook his head, but he was almost smiling too. You are going to turn this court upside down, Your Majesty. Good, Caspian said, his gaze never leaving Rose's face. It is long overdue. The coronation ceremony concluded in chaos. Tradition dictated that the king should retire to his chambers for meditation after receiving the crown, but Caspian refused to leave Rose's side. Instead, he led her through the throne room, his hand on the small of her back, introducing her to nobles and courtiers who bowed with varying degrees of grace. Some were genuinely warm, welcoming Rose with careful courtesy. Others were clearly skeptical, their ancient eyes assessing her as though she were a curiosity that might become a problem. Rose tried to remember names and titles, but it was overwhelming. Lord Dorian, who oversaw the Western territories, Lady Seraphine, who managed relations with the European courts, General Theron, the grizzled commander of the Rosencourt military. They all treated her with formal politeness, but Rose could see the questions in their eyes. What was a human doing here? How long would the king's infatuation last? Could she possibly understand the complexities of their world? You are doing well, Caspian murmured in her ear as they moved through the crowd. I know this is difficult. I feel like I'm on display. Rose admitted quietly. They are all wondering what you see in me. They are wondering what you see in me, Caspian corrected. A king who has been locked in grief for 2 centuries, who barely speaks and never smiles. You could have chosen anyone, Rose. Why him? Rose looked up at him, taking in the sharp lines of his face, the cautious hope in his eyes. Because beneath all that grief, you are kind, because you listen more carefully than anyone I have ever met, because when you look at me, I do not feel invisible. Caspian's smile returned, softer this time. You could never be invisible. They reached the edge of the throne room, where tall windows looked out over the hidden palace gardens. Even underground, the vampires had created beauty bioluminescent plants that glowed with eerie light, carefully tended paths of white stone, fountains that caught the illumination and scattered it in glittering patterns. Rose stared out at it, momentarily forgetting the crowd behind them. It is beautiful, she said. I used to walk there with Thea, Caspian said quietly. After she died, I could not bear to return. It has been maintained by the groundskeepers, but I have not set foot in those gardens in 200 years. Rose glanced at him, seeing the old pain surface in his expression. Tell me about her, if you want to. Caspian was silent for a long moment, and Rose thought he might refuse. Then he began to speak, his voice low and careful. She was fierce, a warrior before she became my queen. We met during the border wars when the southern clans tried to overthrow the Rosencourt. She saved my life twice in battle, and I fell in love with her courage before I ever knew her heart. He paused, his gaze distant. When the hunters took her, I was 3 days' ride away, trapped behind enemy lines. By the time I fought my way home, there was nothing left. They had burned her in daylight, and she had died alone. Rose's throat tightened. I am so sorry. I told myself if I had been there, I could have saved her, that I failed her by not being present, by prioritizing the war over her safety. I swore I would never let that happen again, that I would never care so much for someone that losing them would destroy me. Caspian's hand found Rose's, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. But you made me realize that is not living, that is merely existing. She would not want you to suffer forever, Rose said softly. If she loved you the way you loved her, she would want you to be happy. Perhaps. Caspian looked down at their joined hands. I like to think she would have liked you. You have her courage, in your own way. Climbing that staircase, you knew it could get you killed, and you did it anyway. Rose laughed weakly. I did not think it through very well. You thought it through perfectly. You saw what needed to happen, and you acted. Caspian lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her shiver. Thank you for that, for seeing me. Before Rose could respond, Lucian appeared at Caspian's elbow, his expression apologetic but firm. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the Council of Elders has requested an immediate meeting regarding the proposed law amendment. They are convening in the Chancellor's Hall. Caspian's jaw tightened. Now, the coronation has barely concluded. They are concerned, Your Majesty. Lady Isolde in particular believes the matter requires urgent discussion. Lucian's ancient eyes flicked to Rose, then back to the king. It would be wise to address their concerns before rumors spread further. Caspian looked torn, his gaze moving between Rose and the Chancellor. I do not want to leave her alone. I will be fine, Rose said quickly. Go. Do what you need to do. I can wait. You should not have to wait in a hallway like a servant. Caspian turned to Lucian. Escort Rose to my private chambers. See that she has anything she needs, food, drink, comfort, and make it clear to the household staff that she is to be treated as my honored guest. Lucian bowed. Of course, Your Majesty. Caspian turned back to Rose, his expression softening. I will return as soon as I can. This meeting should not take long. I will make it clear that my decision is not up for debate. Rose nodded, trying to ignore the anxiety coiling in her stomach. The idea of being in the king's private chambers surrounded by vampires who might resent her presence was terrifying, but she forced a smile. I trust you." Something in Caspian's expression eased at those words. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead that was feather-light and achingly tender. "I will not let them hurt you, I promise." Then he was gone, moving through the crowd with that preternatural speed, and Rose was left with Lucien. The ancient vampire studied her with an expression she could not quite read, not hostile, but not friendly either. Assessing. "This way, Miss Ramsey," he said, gesturing toward a side door. Rose followed, her heart pounding. The corridors beyond the throne room were quieter, lit by more of those strange glowing crystals. Lucien led her through a maze of passages, up a narrow staircase, and finally to a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns. He pushed them open, revealing a suite of rooms that took Rose's breath away. Caspian's chambers were not what she expected. She had imagined something cold and austere, befitting a grieving king. Instead, the rooms were filled with life. Books lined every wall, stacked in towering shelves that reached toward the vaulted ceiling. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, though it was unlit. The furniture was old but beautiful, dark wood polished to a shine, upholstered in deep blues and silvers. And everywhere there were small personal touches: a telescope by the window, a chessboard with pieces carved from bone, a worn leather journal left open on the desk. "The king is a scholar," Lucien said, watching Rose's expression. "He reads more than any vampire I have known, human texts as well as our own. He believes understanding both worlds is essential to ruling fairly." Rose moved to the bookshelves, scanning the titles. Philosophy, history, poetry, science. Works in a dozen languages, some so old the spines had cracked. She pulled out a slim volume of Yeats, opening it to find notes in the margins Caspian's handwriting, she realized, neat and precise. "He wrote in this," she murmured, tracing the words. "I never would have guessed he read poetry." "He does not advertise it." Lucien crossed to a side table, pouring water into a crystal glass from a pitcher. "The court expects their king to be strong, decisive, unshakable. They do not know he spends his nights reading love poems and studying human philosophy." He offered Rose the glass. "You are the first person he has allowed into these chambers in 200 years. Even I have only entered by invitation, and I have known him since he was a child." Rose accepted the glass, her hands trembling slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" Lucien settled into a chair, his ancient face thoughtful. "Because I want you to understand what you have undertaken. Caspian is not merely a king, Miss Ramsey. He is a symbol, a figurehead for a society that values tradition and stability above all else. For 2 centuries, he has been the embodiment of those values, unchanging, unshakable, controlled. What you did tonight, it has shattered that image. Some will see it as a beautiful thing, proof that even our king is capable of growth and change. Others will see it as weakness, evidence that he can be swayed by emotion and is therefore unfit to rule." "I did not mean to cause him political trouble," Rose said quietly. I know what you wanted, and I believe your intentions were pure." Lucien leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But intentions matter little in court politics. There are factions here, Miss Ramsey, vampires who have chafed under Caspian's rule for decades. They see him as too human-friendly, too willing to adapt old laws to modern contexts. They will use your presence as ammunition, argue that he has lost sight of our traditions, and they will target you to get to him." Fear spiked through Rose, sharp and cold. "What are you saying? That I should leave?" "I am saying you should be careful, and you should understand what you are asking Caspian to risk." Lucien stood, moving to the window. The touch law, he wishes to abolish it, is not merely about protecting the king from physical harm. It is a symbol of the distance between the sovereign and his subjects, a reminder that the crown is sacred and untouchable. If he removes that law, he is saying that he values connection over tradition, that he is willing to be vulnerable. Some will applaud him for it. Others will see it as the first crack in the foundation, the beginning of the end for our old ways. Rose set down her glass, her mind racing. She had not thought beyond the moment on the staircase, had not considered the broader implications of what Caspian was proposing. "Do you think he should not change the law?" Lucien turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw a hint of warmth in his ancient eyes. I think the law is archaic and long overdue for revision. I also think Caspian has been alone for too long, and you have given him something I feared he would never find again a reason to hope. But hope can be dangerous, Miss Ramsey. It makes us vulnerable. And in this court, vulnerability is often exploited. So what should I do? Be worthy of him. Lucian's voice was gentle but firm. Understand this world you have entered, learn its rules and its dangers. Do not be merely a symbol of his human sympathies, be someone who can stand beside him, who can navigate this court with intelligence and grace. Prove to the skeptics that you are not a liability, but an asset. Rose nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She had thought loving Caspian would be the hardest part. She was beginning to realize that was only the beginning. I will try, she said quietly. I cannot promise I will succeed, but I will try. Lucian inclined his head. That is all anyone can ask. Now, you should rest. The king will likely be ours yet with the council. They are not a group that accepts change easily. He left her then, closing the door softly behind him. Rose stood alone in Caspian's chambers, surrounded by his books and his history, and tried to steady her racing heart. She had wanted to reach him, to show him he did not have to be alone. She had succeeded. But now she had to prove she could survive in his world, could be more than just a human who had caught the king's attention. She moved to the window, looking out over the glowing gardens, and thought about Thea, a warrior queen who had saved Caspian's life, who had fought beside him and loved him fiercely. Rose was not a warrior. She was a seamstress, a woman who worked with needle and thread. But she was also someone who had studied history and technique, who had taught herself skills no one had shown her because she believed they mattered. She could learn. She would learn. For Caspian, she would become someone who could stand beside a king. Hours passed. Rose explored the chambers, careful not to disturb anything but unable to resist studying the details. She found more journals, their pages filled with Caspian's precise handwriting observations on court politics, philosophical musings, sketches of the palace architecture. She found a locked cabinet and did not try to open it, respecting his privacy. She found a small portrait tucked into a bookshelf, a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, beautiful and dangerous. Thea, Rose realized. The Queen Caspian had loved and lost, and Rose studied the portrait for a long time, trying to imagine what Thea had been like. Had she been confident, commanding? Had she known instinctively how to navigate court politics, or had she learned? There was something in the painted eyes that suggested strength, but also warmth. Rose hoped Lucian was right, that Thea would have wanted Caspian to find happiness again. The alternative, that she was somehow betraying the memory of a dead queen, was too painful to consider. She was dozing in a chair by the fireplace when the doors opened and Caspian entered. He looked exhausted, his shoulders tight with tension, but his expression softened immediately when he saw her. You are still awake, he said, crossing to her. Rose stood, closing the distance between them. I wanted to wait for you. How did it go? Caspian sighed, running a hand through his white hair. About as well as expected. Lady Isolde is furious, Lord Dorian is skeptical, and General Theron believes I am making a mistake that will weaken the court. But Chancellor Lucian spoke in my favor, and several of the younger council members agreed that the law is outdated. We have begun the formal amendment process. It will take time, but it will happen. And until then? Until then, you will remain under my protection. No one will dare challenge that openly, not while I am newly crowned, and my authority is absolute. Caspian cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. I am sorry you have been pulled into this, Rose. I know it is not what you signed up for when you agreed to restore a banner. Rose leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. I signed up for it the moment I climbed that staircase. I knew what I was doing. Adj Caspian. Maybe not the specific legal implications, but I knew I was putting myself in the middle of something complicated, and I do not regret it. You should. Caspian's voice was rough with emotion. You could have a normal life, Rose, a human life, with sunlight and simplicity. Instead, you are trapped in a palace full of creatures who could kill you without thinking, in the center of political machinations you should never have had to navigate. Is that what you want? Rose opened her eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. For me to leave? To have a normal life? No. The word was immediate, almost desperate. God help me, no. I want you here with me. I want to wake knowing you are near, to hear your voice and your laugh. I want to show you my world, share with you everything I have kept locked away for 2 centuries, but I also know that is selfish. Then be selfish." Rose reached up, covering his hands with hers. "I am not asking you to protect me from every danger or shield me from every difficulty. I am asking you to let me choose this. Let me choose you." Caspian stared at her for a long moment, conflict warring in his storm gray eyes. Then he leaned down and kissed her, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. It was deep and fierce and full of all the longing he had kept buried for so long. Rose kissed him back with equal intensity, her hand sliding into his hair, holding him close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "I have not courted anyone in 200 years. I do not know how to be with someone without the constant fear of losing them." "We will figure it out together," Rose said. "And if you are afraid, you can tell me. You do not have to be the unshakable king with me, Caspian. You can just be yourself." He pulled her into his arms, then holding her tightly, and Rose felt the tension slowly drain from his body. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, finding comfort in the simple fact of closeness. Eventually, Caspian pulled back, his expression almost shy. "It is nearly dawn. You should sleep. The guest chambers are down the hall. Lucian had them prepared for you." "I do not want to leave you," Rose said honestly. "Not yet." Caspian hesitated, then nodded. "Then stay. There is a couch. It is not the most comfortable, but—" "I trust you, Caspian. I'm not afraid to sleep in the same room." Something in his expression eased at that. He led her to the couch, fetching blankets and pillows from a cabinet, and Rose settled in while he moved about the room, banking the fire and closing the heavy curtains to block out the coming daylight. Then he sat in the chair across from her, a book in his lap, and simply watched over her as she drifted to sleep. The next weeks were a blur of new experiences and careful navigation. Rose moved through the palace like someone learning a foreign language, picking up the rules and customs one cautious step at a time. The vampires of the court were not openly hostile, but they were watchful, assessing. She could feel their eyes on her whenever she entered a room, could hear the whispers that followed in her wake. Caspian was her anchor through it all. He made time for her every day, showing her the palace, introducing her to key figures, explaining the intricate web of alliances and obligations that governed vampire society. He was patient with her questions, never making her feel foolish for not understanding. And slowly, Rose began to see the patterns, the unspoken rules that dictated everything from how one addressed a lord to the significance of seating arrangements at formal dinners. She also began to understand just how isolated Caspian had been. The court respected him, even feared him, but they did not know him. They saw the crown, the power, the perfect control, but not the man beneath. Rose made it her mission to remind him he was more than his title. She brought books from his library to read aloud, spent hours discussing philosophy and art, challenged him in chess games that left them both laughing when her amateur strategies somehow worked against his centuries of experience. And Caspian smiled, not just in private, but in public too. Small smiles at first, cautious and fleeting, but gradually they became more frequent, more genuine. The court noticed. Rose saw the way vampires would pause mid-conversation when Caspian's expression softened, the way they exchanged surprised glances. The king, who had not smiled in 200 years, was smiling again, and it was because of her. Not everyone was pleased. Lady Isolde, a striking vampire with platinum hair and coal blue eyes, made no secret of her disapproval. She was the leader of the traditionalist faction, Lucian had explained, and she viewed Caspian's reforms as a threat to the old ways. Rose tried to stay out of her path, but it was impossible to avoid her entirely in the close quarters of the court. Their confrontation came 3 weeks after the coronation, in the palace library. Rose had been researching vampire history, trying to better understand the culture she had entered when Isolde appeared at her table. "Miss Ramsey, how industrious you are, studying our history." Isolde's voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Tell me, do you truly believe you can understand in a few weeks what we have built over millennia?" Rose looked up, keeping her expression neutral. "I do not claim to understand everything, Lady Isolde, but I am trying to learn." How quaint! Isolde smiled, showing just a hint of fang. You are playing at being one of us, but you are simply a mortal who caught the king's eye. That is not the same as belonging here. I never claimed to belong, Rose said quietly. But I care about Caspian, and that means I care about this court, about the people he rules. If that makes me an outsider trying to understand, then yes, that is exactly what I am. Isolde's smile faded. You think caring is enough? Love does not make you suitable for a king girl. It does not give you the strength to survive court politics, the knowledge to advise him properly, the ability to protect him from those who would use his affection for you as a weapon. You are a liability, nothing more. Rose felt the sting of the words, sharp and precise. Part of her wanted to argue, to defend herself, but another part, the part that had listened carefully to Lucian's warnings, knew that Isolde was testing her, trying to provoke a reaction to prove that Rose was too fragile, too human for this world. She took a breath, steadying herself. You may be right, Lady Isolde. I am human, mortal, limited in ways you are not, but I'm also willing to learn, to work, to become better. And I think that willingness matters. Caspian does not need someone who is already perfect. He needs someone who sees him, who reminds him he is allowed to be more than his duty. Isolde studied her for a long moment, her coal blue eyes unreadable. Then, surprisingly, she inclined her head, a tiny gesture, but one that carried weight. Perhaps you are not as naive as I thought. We shall see, Miss Ramsey. We shall see. She left without another word, and Rose sagged in her chair, her hands shaking. She had survived her first real confrontation with the traditionalist faction. It felt like a small victory, even if she was not entirely sure what she had won. That evening, she told Caspian about the encounter. They were in his chambers, Rose curled up in the chair by the fireplace while Caspian paced, his expression dark. Isolde had no right to speak to you that way, he said, his voice tight with anger. I should have her. No. Rose cut him off gently. She was testing me, Caspian. If you punish her for it, you will only prove her point that I am too fragile to handle this world, that I need you to fight my battles. I need to show the court I can stand on my own. Caspian stopped pacing, looking at her with something like awe. You understand court politics better than I gave you credit for. I have been paying attention. Rose smiled faintly. And I have a good teacher. You have been explaining things to me for weeks, even when you did not realize you were teaching. I am learning, Caspian. I am not perfect at it yet, but I am trying. He crossed to her, kneeling beside the chair so they were at eye level. You are remarkable. You know that, do not you? Most humans would have fled this place weeks ago, overwhelmed by the strangeness and the danger. But you stayed. You fought to understand, to adapt. I have never met anyone like you, Rose. Rose reached out, cupping his face in her hands. And I have never met anyone like you. A king who reads poetry and remembers every small detail I tell him about my work. A man who has been grieving for 200 years and is finally learning to live again. You are worth fighting for, Caspian. Worth learning for. He kissed her then, soft and slow, and Rose felt the now familiar warmth spread through her chest. Every kiss with Caspian felt like a gift, a reminder that he was letting her in, trusting her with pieces of himself he had kept locked away for so long. The weeks turned into months, and Rose settled into a rhythm. She continued her studies, spending hours in the library learning about vampire history, politics, and culture. She befriended some of the younger courtiers, vampires who were less attached to the old traditions and more curious about the human who had won their king's heart. She learned to navigate the formal dinners and court gatherings, to speak carefully and diplomatically, to read the undercurrents in conversations. And she grew closer to Caspian. They spent every evening together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his long life, the centuries he had witnessed, the changes he had seen. She told him about her childhood, her dreams of becoming a master seamstress, the loneliness she had felt before entering his world. They were learning each other, slowly and carefully, building something that felt solid and real. But the shadow of the touch law hung over everything. The amendment process was slow, bogged down by bureaucracy and opposition from the traditionalist faction. Every week, Caspian met with the Council of Elders, arguing his case, addressing concerns. And every week, Rose felt the tension in him build, the frustration of being trapped by outdated laws. They are stalling, he told her one night, his voice weary. Isolde and her faction. They know if they delay long enough, they might be able to force a referendum, put the decision to a full court vote, and in a vote, tradition often wins. Rose took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Then we need to change the narrative. Right now, the traditionalists are framing this as you abandoning old ways for a human. We need to reframe it as you adapting to a new world, honoring the spirit of vampire law while updating its execution. Caspian looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. That is actually brilliant. How did you think of that? I have been reading your father's writings, Rose admitted. He was a reformer too, in his own way. He believed vampire society needed to evolve to survive, that clinging too tightly to the past would make you vulnerable to the changing world. His touch law was about protection. Yes, but it was also a product of his time, a reaction to a specific threat. If we can show that the threat has changed, that the law needs to change with it, we might win over some of the moderates. Caspian stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into a fierce embrace. I love you. Have I told you that today? Rose laughed, warmth flooding through her. You have, but I never tire of hearing it. Good, because I plan to tell you every day for the rest of our lives. The words hung in the air, loaded with implication. The rest of their lives. For Rose, that meant maybe 60 more years if she was lucky. For Caspian, it was barely a blink. They had not talked about it directly, the vast gulf between mortal and immortal lifespans, but Rose felt it like a weight in her chest. She loved him. She wanted every moment with him she could have, but eventually she would age and die, and he would continue alone again. Caspian seemed to sense her thoughts. He pulled back, his storm gray eyes searching her face. You are thinking about time. I'm thinking about how little of it I have compared to you, Rose said quietly. I'm thinking about how unfair it is that I get a handful of decades while you have eternity. Eternity is overrated when you spend it alone. Caspian's voice was soft but firm. I would rather have 60 years with you than 200 more without you. Whatever time we have, Rose, it will be enough, because it will be with you. Tears pricked Rose's eyes. What if I said I wanted more than 60 years? What if I asked... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Caspian went very still. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Rose met his gaze, her heart pounding. Can humans become vampires? Is that possible? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. But it is not a decision to make lightly, Rose. The transformation is painful, dangerous. Some do not survive it, and once it is done, it cannot be undone. You would be giving up sunlight, aging, the possibility of children. You would be bound to the night forever. But I would have forever with you. Rose's voice was steady now, certain. I have thought about this, Caspian. I have thought about nothing else for weeks, and I know it is a huge decision, that I should take more time. But I also know that I do not want to waste the years we have worrying about how few of them there are. If there is a way for us to have more time, I want to take it. Caspian looked torn, hope and fear warring in his expression. This is not something we can rush. The transformation requires preparation, ritual, and you need to be absolutely certain, Rose. You need to live as a human a while longer, experience everything you would be giving up. If, after a year, you still want this, if you are truly sure, then we will talk about it seriously, but not yet. I will not risk you without knowing you have had every chance to choose differently. Rose nodded slowly. She understood his caution, even appreciated it. But the decision had already taken root in her heart. She wanted forever with him. She wanted to stand beside him not just as a mortal curiosity, but as an equal, someone who could truly share his world. 1 year, she agreed. But then we revisit this conversation. 1 year, Caspian echoed, relief and love shining in his eyes. The breakthrough with the touch law came from an unexpected source. Lord Dorian, the skeptical council member who had opposed the amendment from the beginning, approached Rose one afternoon in the gardens. She had been walking the paths she and Caspian now frequented, admiring the bioluminescent flowers, when the old vampire appeared beside her. Miss Ramsey, might I have a word? Rose tensed but nodded. Of course, Lord Dorian. They walked in silence for a moment, the ghostly light casting strange shadows on the white stone paths. Finally, Dorian spoke. I owe you an apology. I have been opposing the King's amendment because I believed it was a sentimental decision, driven by infatuation rather than wisdom. But I have been watching you these past months, observing how you navigate this court. You are thoughtful, careful, respectful. You do not presume to understand everything, but you work to learn. That is not what I expected. Rose glanced at him, surprised. Thank you, Lord Dorian. That means a great deal coming from you. Do not thank me yet. I'm not here to offer you flattery. Dorian stopped walking, turning to face her. I'm here to tell you that I will support the amendment at the next council meeting. Not because I approve of the King's choice to bind himself to a mortal, I still have reservations about that, but because you are right. The touch law is archaic, and it has isolated our sovereign for too long. If Caspian is to rule effectively, he needs to be able to connect with his people. To be seen as approachable, your presence has already changed him for the better. He is more engaged, more willing to listen. That is worth more than any outdated tradition. Rose felt a surge of hope. If you support the amendment, others will follow. You are one of the most respected elders on the council. That is why I am telling you first, Dorian said, because I want you to understand the responsibility that comes with this. If the law changes, it will be in part because of you. That means you will be held to a higher standard than anyone else in this court. Any mistake you make will be magnified, used as evidence that the amendment was a mistake. You will need to be perfect, Miss Ramsey, not because it is fair, but because that is the reality of your position. Rose nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. I understand, and I will do my best. See that you do. Dorian inclined his head, a gesture of respect. For what it is worth, I hope you succeed. The King deserves happiness, we all do. He left her then, and Rose stood alone in the glowing gardens, hope and fear tangled in her chest. This was what she had wanted, a chance for the law to change, for Caspian to be free. But Dorian was right. With that freedom came responsibility, a burden she would carry for as long as she remained in this world. She thought about what Caspian had said about giving up sunlight and aging and the possibility of children. She thought about Thea, the warrior queen who had fought beside Caspian and loved him fiercely. And she thought about who she wanted to be, not just for Caspian, but for herself. By the time she returned to Caspian's chambers that evening, her mind was made up. She would be worthy of this world, of him. She would learn and grow and become someone who could stand beside a king. And when the year was up, she would ask him to make her immortal, to give them forever. But first, they needed to win this battle. The Council of Elders convened 2 weeks later for what would be the final vote on the Touch Law Amendment. Rose was not permitted to attend. She was the subject of the debate, after all. But Caspian promised to send word as soon as the decision was made. She waited in his chambers, too anxious to read, pacing the length of the room while hours dragged by. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside, the doors opened and Caspian entered. He looked exhausted, but triumphant, and Rose knew immediately. They approved it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Unanimously. Caspian crossed to her in 3 long strides, sweeping her into his arms. Dorian argued in favor, and once he did, the other moderates followed. Even Isolde abstained rather than vote against. The law will be formally struck down at the proclamation ceremony next week, and a new statute will be enacted in its place, one that allows for appropriate contact between the sovereign and his subjects while still maintaining necessary security protocols. Rose laughed, giddy with relief and joy. You did it! We did it! No. Caspian pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. You did this, Rose. You won over Dorian. You changed minds through your actions and your patience. This victory is yours as much as mine. Tears slipped down Rose's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. I love you. I cannot believe this is real. Believe it. Caspian kissed her, deep and passionate, and Rose felt the last of the tension drain from her body. They had won. The law would change. Caspian would be free. The proclamation ceremony was scheduled for the following week, a formal event where the new law would be read aloud to the assembled court. It would be held in the throne room at the base of the grand staircase where Rose had first broken protocol, and this time she would be there as an honored guest rather than an accidental intruder. Rose spent the days leading up to the ceremony preparing. She commissioned a dress from the palace seamstresses, a gown of deep midnight blue that complemented the court's silver and white aesthetic without trying to imitate it. She practiced the formal greetings and courtesies Lucian had taught her, determined to conduct herself with perfect grace. And she spent hours with Caspian, soaking in every moment, overwhelmed by the knowledge that they had a real future now, not just stolen moments between legal battles. On the evening of the ceremony, Rose dressed with care, her hand shaking slightly as she fastened the delicate silver clasp at her throat. The gown fit perfectly, elegant and understated, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged in this world, someone who could stand beside a king. Caspian came to escort her personally, and when he saw her, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Rose, you are breathtaking." She flushed, pleasure warming her chest. "You are not so bad yourself." He was dressed in formal robes again, white and silver, with the obsidian crown resting on his white hair. He looked every inch the king, regal and commanding, but when he smiled at her, Rose saw only the man she loved, kind and thoughtful, and hers. They walked to the throne room together, and this time, when the doors opened, Rose entered on Caspian's arm. The assembled court turned to watch, and Rose felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. But she kept her head high, her steps steady. She had earned her place here. The ceremony began with traditional formalities, addresses from the council members, acknowledgments of the king's wisdom, recitations of ancient oaths. Rose stood at the base of the grand staircase, Caspian beside her, listening to the careful political language that wrapped the truth in layers of tradition. But finally, Chancellor Lucian stepped forward, an ancient scroll in his hands. By order of King Caspian Ravenswood, sovereign of the Rosencourt, and with the unanimous approval of the Council of Elders, let it be known that the statute commonly called the Touch Law is hereby struck from our records. In its place, we enact a new law, that the sovereign may choose to permit contact with those he trusts, and that such contact shall not be considered a crime, but rather a symbol of the trust and connection between ruler and ruled. Let this be recorded and honored from this day forward. The throne room was utterly silent as Lucian rolled up the scroll. Then Caspian stepped forward, his voice ringing out clear and strong. This law was outdated, born of fear and isolation. I removed it not out of disrespect for tradition, but out of respect for what this court should be, a place of connection, trust, and community. My father built these walls to protect us, but I will not let them become a prison. I am your king, but I am also a man, and I deserve the chance to live as both. He turned to Rose, extending his hand. She took it without hesitation, their fingers lacing together. Then Caspian did something Rose had never seen. He smiled, wide and genuine and radiant in front of his entire court. "This woman," he said, his voice warm with affection, "has taught me what it means to be seen, to be known. She has reminded me that grief does not have to be permanent, that joy is not a betrayal of those we have lost, and I love her openly, without reservation or apology. If that makes me unfit to rule in some eyes, then so be it. But I believe it makes me a better king, because a ruler who has forgotten how to feel cannot possibly understand the people he serves." The court remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. Rose could see it in the faces around her: surprise, respect, even a few moved expressions. Caspian's words had struck something deep, challenged them to reconsider their assumptions. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to applaud. It was the same young vampire who had started the applause at the coronation, and within moments, others joined in. The sound built, filling the throne room with noise and life, and Rose felt tears prick her eyes again. Caspian looked down at her, his storm gray eyes shining. "Ready? For what?" "To finish what you started." He led her up the grand staircase, their hands still clasped, retracing the steps Rose had taken months ago. But this time, there were no guards, no laws to break. This time, when they reached the top, Caspian turned to face her fully, framing her face in his hands. "I love you, Rose Ramsey," he said loud enough for the entire court to hear. "You are my joy, my hope, my future. And if you will have me, I would like to spend every remaining moment of my existence proving that to you." Rose's breath caught. This was not just a declaration, it was a promise, a commitment spoken in front of everyone who mattered. "I will have you," she whispered, "for as long as you will have me." "Forever, then." Caspian leaned down and kissed her, and this time the court did not wait. They applauded immediately, the sound thunderous and joyful, and Rose felt Caspian smiling against her lips. When they finally broke apart, still standing at the top of the grand staircase, Rose looked out over the assembled vampires and saw acceptance in many faces. Not all there would always be skeptics, traditionalists who resisted change, but enough to build on, to grow from. Caspian kept her close for the rest of the ceremony, his hand never leaving hers. They moved through the crowd together, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Lord Dorian bowed deeply to Rose, respect clear in his ancient eyes. Even Lady Isolde offered a curt nod, which Rose counted as a victory. And throughout it all, Caspian smiled. Not the careful, controlled expressions Rose had glimpsed in private, but genuine, open smiles that transformed his face. The court noticed. She heard the whispers, the quiet awe in voices that had not seen their king express joy in 2 centuries. "He smiles," someone murmured near Rose. "I had forgotten he could." Rose glanced at Caspian, catching his eye, and he grinned at her private and warm and full of love. She had done this. She had climbed that staircase and broken through 200 years of grief, had reminded him that he was allowed to be happy. And in doing so, she had changed not just his life, but the entire court. The year Rose had promised Caspian passed in a blur of joy and growth. She continued her studies, but now, with official sanction, Caspian appointed her as a cultural liaison between the human and vampire worlds, a position that gave her authority and purpose. She traveled to other vampire courts with him. Learning the broader politics of their hidden society, she befriended more of the nobility, building alliances and bridges that strengthened Caspian's position, and she lived. She walked in the gardens with Caspian at night, debated philosophy in his chambers, laughed at his dry humor and terrible chess strategies. She learned what it meant to be loved by someone who had lived for centuries, who brought depth and patience to every moment. And she loved him back with all the fierce intensity of her mortal heart. When the year was up, Rose raised the question of transformation again. They were in the gardens, their favorite place, sitting on a bench beneath the bioluminescent trees. "I am still certain," she said quietly. "I have lived this year fully, experienced everything I thought I might miss, and I still choose this world. I still choose you." Caspian was silent for a long moment, his hand tightening on hers. "The transformation is not easy, Rose. It will hurt. And there is always a risk. I know the risks. I have researched them thoroughly." Rose turned to face him fully. "I am not afraid, Caspian. I am ready." He studied her face, searching for any hint of doubt. When he found none, he nodded slowly. "Then we will do this properly. I will not turn you myself, it is too dangerous, and I could not bear to be the one who caused you pain. We will ask Lucien. He is the oldest vampire I know, the most experienced with transformations. If anyone can ensure you survive, it is him." "When?" "Soon. But first, I want to give you something." Caspian reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a ring, a simple band of silver set with a single perfect diamond. "This was Thea's engagement ring. She would want you to have it, I think. Will you marry me, Rose? Will you become my queen in truth, not just in my heart?" Rose stared at the ring, then at Caspian, and felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, catching the ghostly light of the garden. Then he kissed her, soft and reverent, and Rose felt the rightness of the moment settle into her bones. This was where she belonged, with him in this strange and beautiful world, building a future together. The transformation took place 1 month later in a private chamber deep within the palace. Lucien had prepared everything meticulously, rituals and precautions passed down through millennia. Rose lay on a silk-covered table, Caspian holding her hand tightly, while Lucien explained the process one final time. "It will feel like burning from the inside," he said, his ancient eyes kind but honest. "Your body will die and be reborn as something new. Some find it unbearable. But if you can hold on, if you can survive the pain, you will wake as one of us, immortal, powerful, changed." Rose nodded, her heart pounding but her resolve steady. "I am ready." Lucien leaned down, his fangs extending, and bit into her throat. The pain was immediate and excruciating, a fire that spread through her veins like poison. Rose gasped, her body convulsing, but Caspian's hand anchored her, his voice a steady murmur in her ear. "Stay with me, Rose. Hold on. I am here. I will not leave you." The pain intensified, and Rose felt herself slipping, consciousness fading. But Caspian's voice pulled her back, again and again, refusing to let her fall into darkness. She clung to that voice, to the love in it, and fought through the agony. And then, suddenly, the pain stopped. Rose gasped, her eyes flying open, and the world came into focus with shocking clarity. She could see every detail, the grain in the wood beams above her, the individual threads in Caspian's robes, the dust motes floating in the air. She could hear everything Caspian's breathing, Lucian's heartbeat, the distant sound of water in the palace fountains. "Rose?" Caspian's voice was tentative, hopeful. "Are you all right?" Rose sat up slowly, her body moving with a grace and strength she had never possessed as a human. She looked at her hands, pale now, the veins beneath her skin faint and cool. Then she looked at Caspian and saw him with new eyes, saw the love and fear and relief written across his perfect face. "I am all right," she said, her voice slightly changed, richer somehow. "I am more than all right. I am here, with you, forever." Caspian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she might have broken if she were still human. But she was not human anymore. She was vampire, immortal, his equal in this world at last. "Welcome home," he whispered into her hair. "My Rose, my queen." The coronation for Queen Rose Ravenswood took place 3 months later, once she had adjusted to her new nature and learned to control the enhanced strength and senses that came with immortality. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, Caspian beside her, as Lucian placed a crown of silver and diamonds on her head. "By blood and bone, by night and shadow, I name you Queen of the Rosencourt, partner to the sovereign, protector of the new covenants. May your reign be long and your wisdom deep." The court assembled below erupted in applause, genuine this time, warm and welcoming. Rose looked out over the faces, recognizing so many of them now. Lord Dorian, who had become an unexpected ally. Lady Isolde, who had grudgingly accepted Rose's place. The younger vampires who had welcomed her from the beginning. And Lucian, who smiled at her with something like pride. Caspian took her hand, raising it to his lips. "Are you happy?" Rose looked at him, at the love shining in his storm-gray eyes, and smiled. "I am complete. For the first time in my life or my existence, I am exactly where I am meant to be." They descended the grand staircase together, king and queen, and the court parted to let them pass. As they reached the bottom, Rose glanced back up at the spot where she had first kissed Caspian, where she had broken every rule to reach him. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet also like yesterday. "And do you ever regret it?" Caspian asked softly, following her gaze. "Giving up your mortality, your human life?" Rose turned to him, cupping his face in her hands. "Never. You gave me forever, Caspian. That is the greatest gift anyone could ask for." He smiled, then that radiant, unguarded smile that still made her heart skip, and kissed her in front of the entire court. And as the applause rang out around them, Rose knew she had made the right choice, not just for Caspian, but for herself. She had found her place in this strange and beautiful world, had become someone who could stand beside a king and help him rule with wisdom and compassion. The years stretched ahead of them, infinite and full of possibility. They would face challenges. Certainly ruling was never easy, and there would always be those who resisted change. But they would face them together, bound by love and trust and the memory of that first brave moment on the grand staircase. Rose had climbed those steps, not knowing what she would find at the top. She had found everything: a king who had forgotten how to smile, a court that needed change, a love that would span eternity, and she had changed everything by simply being brave enough to choose love over fear, connection over isolation. The entire silent court had seen their king smile because Rose had reminded him he was allowed to. And now, as his queen, she would spend forever making sure he never forgot it again. Together, they walked through the throne room, hand in hand, the future bright and endless before them. The court followed, their voices rising in celebration, and for the first time in 200 years, the Rosencourt felt truly alive. Caspian leaned close, whispering in Rose's ear, "Thank you for climbing that staircase, for seeing me, for loving me." Rose squeezed his hand, her smile soft and certain. "Thank you for letting me, for choosing to live again, for giving us this." They stepped out into the glowing gardens where the bioluminescent flowers cast their ethereal light, and Rose felt peace settle over her like a benediction. This was home, this strange, beautiful, impossible world, and she would spend eternity exploring it with the man she loved, building a future that honored both tradition and change, grief and joy, the past and the infinite possibilities of forever. The grand staircase stood behind them, a symbol of where they had begun, but ahead lay the rest of their immortal lives, and Rose could not wait to see what they would build together. A court that valued connection as much as tradition, a kingdom that balanced strength with compassion, a love that would endure through centuries, growing deeper with every passing year. Caspian had not smiled in 214 years. But Rose had changed that with a kiss on the grand staircase in front of the entire silent court. And now, every day for the rest of eternity, she would give him new reasons to keep smiling. That was her gift to him, and his gift to her was forever. Together, they would make it count.